Again, Mr. Hale, will you lead us in the pledge? Come on, you remember it.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, microphone on. Call the meeting to order, and I will ask Ms. Gamero for the roll call, please.
Commissioner Monette?
Here.
Commissioner Pont?
Here.
Vice Chair Knudsen?
Present.
And Chair Hardy?
Here. This is the time for a public forum, an opportunity for members of the public to address the Commission on items of interest to the public that are not listed in the agenda. And because of restrictions imposed by the Brown Act, the Commission may not engage in discussion nor take action on matters not described on the agenda. Is there anyone who would like to speak on a matter not on our agenda? Okay, seeing none, I will move on to the consent items. Members of the public or the Commission may request that an item be removed from the consent agenda for discussion. Unless that is done, one motion may be used to adopt all recommendations. Is there any member of the Commission who would like to pull an item from consent?
I would like to pull 4.2.
Okay, is there any member of the public who would like to pull an item from consent? 4.2 is being pulled. Okay, seeing none, then we'll go on to a discussion of item 4.2, which is a request for design review exemption to allow the construction of a 500 square foot carport trellis and two appurtenant 110 square foot storage areas with a maximum height of approximately 10 feet at 890 Fulton Lane in the A20 zoning district. There is a staff report. I can't. Is this yours, Director House?
It doesn't say who prepared it.
Oh, you're right. It is my report, and I'm not sure exactly what happened with the format.
I thought you were being modest.
That was one of my questions.
Would you?
Sure. So the item before the Commission is, as mentioned, a design review exemption to construct a 500 square foot carport trellis with 210 square foot storage areas at 890 Fulton Lane in the A20 zoning district. 890 Fulton Lane is an approximately 1 acre parcel developed with a single family home and several residential accessory buildings. The request is to allow construction of the trellis and storage areas as identified. Project was identified as being exempt from SEQA under a Class 3 categorical exemption, and there are several general plan analysis identifying that staff found that the proposal was in keeping with the intent of that district. There's some zoning analysis in the staff report which identifies that the project is generally applicable or compliant with the zoning standards. However, there is one section which identifies that no more than one accessory building or structure shall be located in front of the most forward portion of the front elevation of the house. The intent of this is to discourage the construction of walls and accessory buildings or structures to obscure the visibility of the home. The proposed structure is directly adjacent and in line with an existing garage which is already located in front of the house, so a technical application of the code could find fault with this design. Staff found that it was within the intent of this code section. However, if the Commission has concerns, they can condition the project to be attached to the garage. And unfortunately, the applicant called me late this afternoon and was unable to attend the meeting, and so there is no one representing the project to answer any questions that staff is unable to answer should they arise. With that, staff is recommending approval and is available to answer any questions.
Okay, so my first question was who prepared it, because I just didn't see, and then. Okay, in one place it says that the zoning is Ag A20, and then in another place it says it's agriculture. Maybe maybe that's okay. I just didn't know. I was just a little confused by this. And then at the bottom of the page 14 of 103, the design proposes to locate the structure, which is freestanding, and you mean both structures, or which is that the trellis? Is that what are you talking about there?
So the trellis and the two storage areas are incorporated into one structural building. However, the trellis, as identified, is an open air, so it doesn't have any roof, whereas the two storage areas are fully enclosed with walls and roofs.
So when it says the structure, it means the structures. It means two structures.
Sure, yes.
Okay, because I didn't understand that. And under issues, it says to construct a detached residential structure in front of the primary building. What?
Oh, that should have been accessory building. I'm sorry. No.
Well, is it a residential structure?
Well,
Or is it
it's an
storage?
accessory residential structure. So any shed, any structure on a residential lot is a residential structure.
You wouldn't call it a storage structure.
That is the same. It's just not commercial.
All right, okay.
So it's
I just didn't
terminology and
understand what that
semantics,
meant.
sure.
Okay. And I guess it's pretty obvious. The 220 feet with the garage or 110 feet with the garage, over back on page 13, where under subject. So it's two appurtenant 110-foot square storage areas. Okay, so is it 220 feet plus the 500 square foot carport, or is it? Shouldn't it be 220 there? Two appurtenant. Okay, so that I'm just clarifying. So it's 220 feet plus 500 square feet. Yeah.
So looking at
Or sorry,
page 20 of 103 may help. So you can see it's all incorporated as one structure. However, there are kind of several elements to it. One is the carport, the other being the storage areas.
So the storage areas are in front of each other, or they're side by side?
They're side by side at the back end of the carport, so to speak.
Okay. All right. Thanks. I just didn't understand it as much.
Sure. And I think the zoning and general plan designation were the confusion. The general plan designation is agriculture, AG. The zoning is A20. However, to add a little bit more confusion, you apply the standards from the
Accessory building?
LR1A zoning district when the acreage is less than a certain size in the A20
yeah.
district.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
Chair Hardy, I have a couple questions. May I ask them of
Please.
Director Hausch? Maybe it's here somewhere. How far back from the street is the
30 feet.
30 feet. And the structure. So if you're going down Fulton Lane and you glance towards this series of buildings, 30 feet. There's no build structure until 30 feet, and then the structure itself is an additional 20 feet before the garage.
That's approximately correct.
So it was 50 foot off of
Yes.
and now it's going to be 30 foot.
That's correct.
And 30 foot, is that within our code?
That's the setback.
That is the setback. Okay, I'll have a comment where is the access, the drive access on page 17?
So yeah, on 17, it's on the very bottom right-hand corner is one driveway, and it
Okay.
kind of has a gate symbol.
Okay.
And then on the kind of upper right, not quite in the corner, is another driveway. So it actually has two driveway entrances.
And so that second driveway entrance would not be able to get into the carport, is
That's
that correct?
correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, I'll have, when we get to the discussion, I'll have a further comment, but that's all the questions I have. Thanks.
Commissioner Pont.
I do have, well, I've got two things. One, it'd be nice as a standard thing if we would get the APN map for the area, each and every project like this, just as a regular thing. I see a second way out of the problem of the two storage buildings. Connecting them to the garage is one. The other one would be roofing over that little space between them. If I'm looking at it right, Page 20 of 103. Is that an open space between the two storage buildings?
That is open.
If they roof that over, that would essentially make it one storage building.
Well, staff was looking at it with the concern of the existing garage plus the trellis storage structure combo being two structures in front of the primary dwelling.
Okay.
Even though they are 100% in the same line and very easily
Okay.
could be attached to not address that.
Okay. Well, it's just to fulfill the letter of statute, why don't we just have them attach the trellis to the building and make it one structure? That's
Because
the easiest way.
isn't there a limit to how big a storage structure can be? It can't be more than 110 feet.
The other thing this project points out to me is our unlimited open structure rule. I think that's something we're going to have to address eventually. If your structure's open, it can be as big as you want. You can cover the entire bloody yard with it. I think it's something we're going to have to address, because if you look at this, if you look at the overhead, it's on page 17. I mean, if we started adding up all the covered areas as well, I realize that they meet the letter of the statute now, and they're under the 30% maximum lot coverage. But if you added that all up, they'd probably be closer to 40%.
Yeah, I was thinking at the beginning that the two structures next to each other, they could just knock the walls out and they'd have a 220-foot structure, which would have demanded a different kind of approach. So that's, that's not a concern, or, I don't even know if it's a concern of mine, but I thought about that. If you want to build something bigger than 110, was that a consideration, or?
I would say it was not a concern for staff, and I will say it is typical for folks to find creative ways to both meet the regulations and their needs for their property.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, though, if you were to attach the storage to the garage so that it's one unit, that's a perfectly acceptable way to, from a square footage perspective, it's a perfectly acceptable way. You're not limited in your size of the garage, according to.
But you have to have design. If you build something more than 110 feet, it's more complicated to do. You can.
I think it's enclosed more than 120, right?
Yeah, so an individual permit that was 120 square feet or less would not be required to get a building permit.
Right.
Because these are, even though the storage areas separately are less than 120 square feet, they're all integrated as one structure with the carport, the storage areas, and the foundation. So they will be getting a building permit and engineering.
Right, so there's no exemption
I
there.
didn't know that.
So they should have done one at a time.
Right.
So maybe we're sort of leaking into the discussion part of this. Maybe we should wait for public comment.
Maybe we should wait for my question of staff. Dr. House, am I right in thinking, although there's nothing on the plans to say one way or the other, that this is a property on septic? I'm not aware of a sewer main running down that far on Fulton. I don't think there's a sewer main on that side of the railroad tracks.
That's my understanding.
Well, given previous discussions related to the proposed general plan policy regarding sewer extensions down Highway 29, I'm more conscious now than before that we have areas in the city that really should be programmed in some manner for future connection. And I'm always concerned that because of the evolution of standards, and I've got to back up here. The sun is getting me. Okay, thank you. you could pretty much bet money that there's some number of residential septic systems that would not get a permit today. They wouldn't have the area. I look at this, it's reported as a 1 acre parcel. I don't have a clear sense of the square footage. There's obviously a corner there behind the residence that doesn't have anything on it. Pretty sure the septic isn't under the swimming pool, so it's got to be in that one back corner, and that should have both the leach field, the primary and the secondary reserve area. If there's enough, it's just barely. And so the reason I bring all this up is because I would like to be informed as things come to us when we're looking at a parcel with a septic system, just so that we keep that in our zone of attention. Looking ahead to the day, which hopefully is not too far off, when we can have some discussion with the Public Works Director about in which parts of the city the priorities for extensions and connections would be. And I think we'll be better prepared as a commission for that discussion if we're just getting that little bit of information. I'd be inclined to say that showing the location of an existing tank and leach field and reserve area should be part of the overhead for any application. Just otherwise, we don't know. I have to ask questions, and we talk about it when really all I'm looking for is a picture. So that's my thought on that.
I have a follow-up comment. Along with that, could you also let us know what it costs today for a person to hook up to the sewer? Because, as a person who has a septic tank, which I love and has plenty of room, I know it's very, very expensive to, or at least I've been told, it's very expensive to hook up. I'm not sure what the cost is.
Well, the big cost is the extension of a main.
Whatever
Once the main is
big.
there, construction of the lateral is not necessarily a big deal.
But I think the city charges a lot. Like there was a house on my block where I heard
the city doesn't build it.
But there are.
I think she's referring to the connection fee. There is a flat one-time fee for the first initial hookup to allow the city to ensure there's capacity in the treatment plant.
Yeah. All the construction costs. Well, it would be good to know. I agree.
And isn't there a requirement that there be a sewer line within a certain distance from a place that has a septic tank before requiring them to? If it's really far away, because there's where would the closest sewer line be on?
So there are a number of competing policies, one of which says not to extend city utilities beyond the urban limit line, which this property is outside the urban limit line. There's others that say require properties to connect within there with when they are within 200 or 300 feet of a sewer line, without talking about the urban limit line. So there's a number of competing priorities which do not always align. And so I do understand the concern, and also agree with the concept of trying to help prioritize where future sewer connections could be made. But we do have competing policies that we don't have clear resolution to in every situation.
Well, right, and then where we have 1 acre parcels or smaller, although hopefully there would be few that are smaller than 1 acre outside the urban limit line. But even at 1 acre, I think we should be revisiting our coverage requirement and the definitions involved, because even if we do nothing, we can be pretty sure that over time the state will increase the requirements for leach fields and reserve areas. And what we don't want to be doing is inadvertently allowing development that ultimately prevents that property owner from meeting upgraded standards without tearing something down. In fact, once you've built on it and compacted the soil, you've created a whole new kind of problem.
Well, I'd like to have a conversation sometime, not tonight, but about, I don't see there's an automatic advantage to hooking all the septic tanks up to the city. I know that we need the funds, the revenue, but we also have a capacity in the sewer, so it's kind of like it's not taxing the sewer system to have if you have a well-functioning septic system. And I don't see what the push is. Is it for revenue, or what is it?
Well, it's a public health and safety concern, and we have areas of the city where the systems don't function in the winter.
Well, that's
and
not
everyone's
cool.
known that and basically been living with it for, 50 years or more.
Well, it reminds me of Cronulla, which is a place where there's a sewer system that hasn't been functioning very well for years, too.
Yeah.
But,
So, and what I know from experience in my work is that smaller parcels are most likely to end up compromised over time. Typically because 50, 60 years ago, when a lot of these properties were developed, the standards were more modest, so people weren't required to set aside as much room. And then when the primary system fails, as they most all will over time, just because there's a limit to how much solid material you can move through that leach line before the perforations plug and the soil just loses capacity to do that work, you don't necessarily have enough reserve area. Right. So thinking about it one way or another, whether it's figuring out where we really need to prioritize connection or figuring out what we need to do with our development standards so that people in appropriate locations can be on septic for generations to come, there we might want to be looking at our development standards.
okay. Yeah,
And
thanks.
a point of clarification, Chair Hardy, regarding your comment is that, for example, in this particular property, were there to be a sewer main down Fulton, and were it then to need to be connected to this home, potentially where a normal sewer outline would go might be impacted by the fact that there's garages and sheds and whatnot in a...
Yeah, it
Is
would
that
be
the
an
idea?
interesting...
Is that the question? Part of the question?
No, I'm wondering if there's really enough area there for the long term that's unimpacted, and I'm also wondering whether, in fact, given our existing development standards, whether we could find ourselves in a position of inadvertently approving an application that impacts an area that would be essential in the future to the proper functioning of the system. That's my concern. But that's enough on that. I think we should move this forward. We can come back to septic systems another time. So if there are no more questions for staff, I'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak on this item? Seeing none, the public hearing is closed. Discussion, comments, motion? What do we want to do?
I have no problem supporting this. I just had it.
I would like to see it meet the technical letter of our existing statute. So I would like to have it connected, a single structure.
I concur. It's too awkward to have two structures in front of the main building. I think it, as a matter of course, to encourage our applicants to follow the letter, I think attaching it is eminently reasonable.
What's the letter that you're referring to here?
The fact that there's allowed one structure in front of a primary building, and this would be two structures.
Okay.
So we'd be back to 1 if we attach it and make it a single structure.
Does that change the requirements for the applicant if it's a 220-foot building instead of a 110-foot?
They still need a building.
The requirement, how it would change is how it's attached to the garage structure, but it would not change the design of the freestanding portions,
Or the fees or anything else?
not in any material way.
And the difference in connecting it to the garage, would that be very expensive, or do you have a sense of what's the
Well,
difference?
the issue is actually it will affect an area that's currently landscape. It will no longer be able to serve as landscape, and there would be additional costs associated with the connection.
If you turn this into one building, they're going to lose landscaping? That would be a good reason not to do it, as far as I'm concerned.
Where would that be? Can you explain to me?
It's not clearly delineated on the site plan, page 17 of 103, but a site visit, there is a strip of landscaping between where the carport is proposed. The carport and the 2 storage areas are proposed, and the garage. The outline that's shown on page 17 of 103 is actually slightly larger than the structure would actually be in context.
Okay.
On the other hand, a connection to the garage could allow a breezeway, for example, between the carport, the sheds, and the garage, and that would also be perfectly acceptable. So they could keep the landscaping and simply have sort of a wider roofing structure, so to speak.
I don't
Plant
get it. How
hosta.
can you attach it to the garage and still have a breezeway between it and the garage?
Well, it would be attached to the roof in this situation.
Yeah.
What do you mean? I'm sorry, I just saw it roof on roof. I mean, the language. Are you talking about a breezeway kind of, what?
So if you imagine a trellis being an open air
Oh, the trellis.
structure
You're talking about the trellis.
with open air roofing, the open air portion of the roofing could be extended to the garage itself, maintaining the landscape area, but also connecting it to meet the technical letter.
Director Hausch, on page 20 of 103, it looks like the storage buildings are at the, I guess I'd have to call it the rear of the open air part.
That's correct. The presentation of these plans is not, it doesn't, because of the compression of the file,
Right.
when we printed it, it doesn't clearly demonstrate the structure is actually wider than it is, or as wide as it is long, but it doesn't translate into the prints.
Okay. So on the drawing at 17 and 103, the storage part of the facility is, well, where they've got the 2 trees drawn. Is
That's
that correct?
That's correct.
Well, if they would just link that part to the garage, right? Just change that roof line so it follows the roof pitch of the garage. It would look like one structure. It would be integrated, and they could still leave the trellis part where it looks like they've got the planting strip. If they attach the trellis to the auxiliary storage structures, and then the auxiliary storage structures are connected to the garage, it looks like you could still leave what's above the 2 or 3 feet of planting strip there. You could still leave that open to sky, and you still have technically a single structure.
Correct.
So,
Well, I'm going to take a somewhat different tack here. I'm not particularly troubled by the connection or lack of connection question, but so I could support the application as is, but I don't want to promote a 2-2 split that in effect denies the project. And at the same time, with the applicant not present, I'm very uncomfortable with effectively, okay, the applicant is here. Well, I was going to say that I don't think we should be designing the applicant's project. I think it's more a question of does the applicant have a concept here that satisfies the requirement for a connection if the ordinance is interpreted that way without consideration of its intent. And that is satisfactory to the applicant, right? Is there a win-win here? And I'm not saying that because I think the applicant needs to have an answer ready. I was going to propose a continuance, but since the applicant is present, I'm going to open the public hearing and invite the applicant to speak. Please come to the microphone and identify yourself for the record.
It looks comfy. My name is Reese Purcell, here on behalf of Paul Tao. Changing the roof line is not a problem at this point. We can do that, follow the garage or follow other roof lines on site. Now, doing that with the continued plan with the flat roof doesn't really work. Just doesn't. You can't build it like that. So we'd have to lose the carport, which is okay with us as well. We're okay with that as well.
So then, what do you have if you lose the carport?
2 storage sheds with the roof line that follows the roof, which follows the garage. Or 1 storage shed with 2 separate rooms. Same foundation, same slab, 2 separate rooms with a breezeway between them.
So it's the trellis-covered carport that disappears then?
And the
Essentially,
landscaping?
if that's the issue, then yes.
But couldn't you just keep the trellis carport as it is without attaching that portion to the building?
Keeping the trellis as it is, the point of one of the main functions of that carport is to attach solar to the top of it.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That entire property has solar on every building, and he's
Good purpose.
So may I ask, is there that there's? I don't see. So the design of the carport right now is a flat roof,
yes, sir.
including the 2-story buildings.
Yes, sir.
Were you going to put solar on the storage, on the flat storage
The
roofs?
entire structure would be continuous, and there'd be, I believe, 56 solar panels atop the whole thing.
I really am in
Okay.
favor of supporting
And it's
the solar
over-
panel.
Over the entire structure,
Yes, sir.
including the storage buildings.
Yes, sir.
Including the trellises.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I don't care how it's attached to the garage, just as long as it's attached.
Attach it with a solar panel.
That you can't do, because those are temporary.
Maybe I'll reserve my question until we're back into staff discussion, or discussion amongst ourselves, but that's very interesting. Thank you.
And the landscaping would stay with what you've just
We would have to lose something.
Well, if you're going to cover the whole the whole thing with solar panels, you're going to cover over your green area in there as well.
No, sir. There's a good 10 feet between the garage and this structure, and that space
Well,
between.
your drawing here has a car like 4 feet from the garage. So, no, that doesn't work.
I have a drawing right here.
So, can we have a drawing that shows us what it actually is rather than artist's conception?
Sounds like you've been very thoughtful in designing this.
I've designed it a handful of times, so.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry.
We can put it on the overhead.
Would you do that, please?
So in our drawing, it looks like it stops right at the edge of the car that's closest to the garage.
That's what I just emailed you. I don't know if you got it.
So it is a separate and freestanding structure.
So as mentioned, the original site plan included didn't quite show all the context, and this allows to see there is a strip of landscaping proposed, or existing currently, that was proposed to remain with the design.
So it literally is a separate freestanding structure, and it's, I wouldn't call that 10, but maybe 6 or 7 feet from the garage. So the only way to make that attached is make your trellis a bit wider and start those beams inside the garage.
I would just ledger the building if I had to and extend my trellis and roof line out. Because there's no way to make a flat roof line up with the existing roof.
No, it won't line up, for sure. But we've got roofs all over town that don't line up.
He wants it lined up, I think.
Especially since you're going to have solar panels on them, and I assume they're going to be tilted.
Yeah, it's a 2% grade towards the west.
What, 20 degrees, 25 degrees?
2%.
Just 2%?
Yeah.
That's 2%, 9 degrees, 18 degrees. Okay.
Noah, can I ask you again to state what your interpretation of the ordinance was? That
Excuse me a second,
Oh,
Bobby.
is this not appropriate?
Well, it's just an order of discussion
sorry.
here. Has everyone asked all of the questions of the applicant's representative that they wish? No more questions? Okay, then I will close the public hearing. Thank you. And we'll go back to commission discussion. Go ahead, Bobby.
Yeah, so I'd like to know how you interpreted the ordinance to make the decision, make the recommendation that you did.
So you'll see on the bottom of page 14, it references the code section, 17.11.010B, and it says, no more than one accessory building or structure shall be located in front of the most forward portion of the front elevation of the main house. Staff very easily,
Why don't you read the intent?
I was going to say, staff very easily was able to come up with an interpretation of this, because it also then states, this is actually out of the code, the intent of this provision is to discourage the construction of walls and accessory buildings or structures that obscure the visibility of the main house from the street. And in looking at this, the most forward portion of the front elevation of the main house is located here. So there would be no structures in front of the most forward portion of the elevation of the main house. So I think we are fine, but staff did want to point out that language for the commission to consider.
I'm just thinking that the applicant is very thoughtful and really did a lot of work to make something that was good, and I mean that satisfied the planning department and the ordinance, as well as provided for solar panels, and which I think is a positive direction to go in. And I just this discussion has reaffirmed my commitment to approve what we've been presented with.
I don't like being persnickety, but
Don't do it.
I'm persnickety because I do think that the town has, we can change regulations, but there's a reason why we ask people building in this town to only have one structure in front of the main house, right?
But the reason here is fulfilled with the plans as they are.
That's fine, but it's two structures. I mean, you just can't.
So the intent doesn't have, that's kind of like the letter of the law as opposed to the intent of the law.
The intent, the letter is one structure in front of the main house.
The spirit of the law.
Right. And it may have talked about disguising the front of the house, and I mean, we're talking about the same thing, essentially. But I hate to make exemptions for folks, then other folks want the same exemptions, right? Well, you approved it on Fulton. Why don't you approve it on Spring Street or approve it on Madrona? And so therefore, I like it when we don't make these sort of exemptions.
I need to back up and ask a question of staff here. There seems to have been a number either transposed or left off on the section number.
That could be the case. Are you trying to read the...
I'm trying to find it so I can read what's around it as we talk about it.
This is the longest conversation about a consent item I think we've had in a couple of years. And at some point we need to approve the minutes from last.
Yes.
I think.
Well, we do have the balance of the consent agenda,
Yes, all
but
right.
that presumably will be easy if we could get through this.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, I end up
6.
more
1B.
convinced now than before that, given the nature of the discussion and the concerns raised by Commission and the very thoughtful responses of the applicant's representative, that the kindest and most appropriate thing we could do would be to continue it to a date certain and give the applicant and the applicant's representative an opportunity to think through their options. I don't want to discourage the construction of something here that adds additional solar capacity. I respect the concerns that have been raised regarding compliance with the ordinance, and I don't really think we should be trying to design the solution on the spot. We have another meeting in 2 weeks. I would be proposing that we continue it to then, but that's just me.
Should we ask the applicant which he would prefer?
Well, the applicant isn't here. The applicant's representative is here.
The applicant's representative?
Or that's the applicant, but not the property owner. I don't know how the application was formatted.
Well, since I will move your suggestion that we continue this for 2 weeks.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Again, if it's discussion, you don't want to hear from the representative? He might be willing to make changes in order to go forward earlier. I mean, shouldn't we give him a chance to say?
Well, I'm happy to invite him back. I'll reopen the public hearing.
Okay. Wasn't sure.
I'll close the public hearing. There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Ms. Gamera, would you please take the vote?
Commissioner Monette?
Yes.
Commissioner Knudsen?
Yes.
Commissioner Pont?
Yes.
Chair Hardy?
Yes. Okay, we managed to get that done sort of. We managed to get that done sort of.
We're halfway through the consent agenda.
So back to the consent, and that leaves us with item 4.1, approval of minutes. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Camaro?
Commissioner Pont?
Yes.
Commissioner Monette?
Yes.
Vice Chair Knudsen?
Yes.
Chair Hardy?
Yes. That brings us then to our public hearing items. The first is 5.1, a request by Tomoko Simons for a use permit to establish an aesthetician business in an existing tenant space located at 1119 Hunt Avenue, Suite B, in the Central Business District. There being no one else, Director House, would you present the staff report, please?
Thank you, Chair Hardy. As identified, this is a use permit for an aesthetician business proposed at 1119 Hunt Avenue, Suite B in the Central Business Zoning District. The subject space is 273 square feet, formerly served as storage space for an adjacent clothing store. The applicant is requesting to open an esthetician business to provide facials by invitation and referral only, and it will include all types of body treatments, facials, and sales of facial products and devices. Hours of operation are proposed as Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. No exterior modifications are proposed. Staff found that the project is exempt from CEQA under a Class 1 categorical exemption and was in compliance with the general plan policies regarding downtown businesses. And in addition, the zoning analysis found that the project does meet the requirements of the zoning code with specific identification that the project is in the parking impact overlay district, which identifies a reduced parking requirement for such properties. Given that the site is essentially a new business, it was reviewed under the retail parking establishment versus a storage parking requirements, and the retail requirements trigger a one space per 300 square foot parking number, and so the applicant has identified that there is one space reserved for this suite, and therefore meeting the code requirements. There's some additional analysis in the staff report and resolution identifying compliance with the code standards, and the project is required to maintain at least one designated parking space, and therefore staff is recommending approval. I'm available for any questions, and the applicant is here to answer any questions as well.
I'm hesitating because I honestly find our amended order of discussion sometimes confusing. Nevertheless, it's official. It's been written down. I'd like to invite the applicant forward to answer any questions that the commissioners may have regarding the project.
Hello.
Thank you. Commissioner Pont, do you have any questions?
I just have one question.
Yes.
The parking is across the street?
Yes.
Okay. That was it?
Okay.
Any other questions for...
Yes, is this upstairs or downstairs?
It's downstairs,
Downstairs.
street level.
All right, thank you.
No, I don't have any questions. But if you have a statement, I'd love to hear your statement about your business. I think
I haven't opened the public hearing.
Oh, okay. All right.
It is a confusing order.
Sorry.
But I'm trying to adhere to it more or less like we're trying to adhere to our zoning ordinance.
Dave Rosenberg is
So, thank you. You'll have an opportunity to present the project in just a minute. Now, are there any questions of staff from the commission?
This might be, I just was, it's very trivial, but I just wondered, you used different things from the central business plan, from the general plan. And it was the city's social and cultural core. It was,
What page are you on?
And I'm on page 32 of 100. Let's see, and I just wondered. Because this, and you mentioned something else somewhere else, but this is, emphasis is on pedestrian-oriented retail. But this is appointment only. Is that correct? So it's not going to be. I just wondered why they. I'm fine with that. I have no problem with that. I just was a little confused why those references were made because it didn't seem to match. But.
So staff finds that the creation of another business adjacent to existing businesses allows for duplicated trips in one. So you could park your car once, do multiple shopping trips. In addition, expanding the amount of available services downtown does help to combine or contribute to the city's downtown being the social and business core of the city.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for staff? Hearing none, I'll open the public hearing and invite the applicant to describe the project.
I wasn't prepared to do that, but
If it is perfectly acceptable to say it's all here and you would prefer not.
well, aesthetic business is my passion. I've been worked for auberge resorts for last 10 years, and so the clients I already have, which I've been seeing monthly, I've been seeing them for several years. And I would like to increase the number, but it's going to be just referral and invitation only, because I'd like to be selective for my own safety and my level of service I have achieved all these years.
Thank you. Thank you. That was an excellent description of the business. You may sit down, and I'll ask if there's anyone else who would like to speak. You're welcome. Are there any other members of the public who would like to address the commission at this time? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Commissioners, what is thy pleasure?
I'd like to move that this project is exempt from CEQA and that to approve the staff recommendation and allow this business to move forward.
Second?
And I'd like to just remark, I'm just was very appreciative of the letters that came in your support, and that's an additional positive aspect of this endeavor.
And thank you for the lovely statement of your business. Well, we've managed to make a long job out of a consent item and a very short one out of the public hearing, but I think that's got to be okay. There is a motion.
And a second.
And a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Gamera, would you please?
Vice Chair Knudsen,
Yes.
Commissioner Pont,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Chair Hardy.
Yes. That's it. That brings us to our second public hearing. Item 5.2, review and recommendation to the City Council of an ordinance amending and restating St. Helena Municipal Code Chapter 17.136.050, temporary uses, in order to create a temporary use permit and an administrative review process for such permits citywide. Director Hausch.
Thank you, Chair Hardy, members of the Commission and the public. As mentioned, the item before the Commission this evening is a draft ordinance review and recommendation on a draft ordinance proposing to create a temporary use permit. So specifically, the staff is asking the Planning Commission to review the ordinance creating a temporary use permit, which proposes to memorialize the allowance for certain limited uses as currently allowed through various city regulations, create a mechanism for temporary events, and also create a mechanism for temporary uses. And there are specific details and timelines and requirements associated for each element. For some background, the City Council, in adopting their goals, included one goal to ensure the long-term economic sustainability of the community, while also expressing a desire to revitalize downtown and improve resilience. And then further, after commissioning a analysis of the downtown this late summer, the council reviewed that draft analysis and provided recommendations to prioritize some of the recommended initiatives, and one of which was the creation of a temporary use permit. Staff has accelerated this recommendation in an effort to try to accommodate temporary or pop-up uses prior to the upcoming holiday shopping season downtown. So the proposed changes would, as mentioned, memorialize certain temporary activities as permitted, and this includes, construction yards, emergency facilities, filming, although filming is not included as a part of this, we have a separate film permit, garage sales, activities on public property as the council approves, those types of things. So those are memorialized as permitted temporary activities. And then it proposes to create a temporary use permit process for other temporary activities such as events, uses, seasonal sales lots, and temporary structures. And just to give a little bit of specifics behind these, some of the temporary kind of special events would include arts and crafts, sales events, concerts, fairs, and festivals, so that type of use. So that could be both an indoor or an outdoor use, depending on the property and the venue. Separately, indoor kind of pop-up uses are proposed to be permitted, and those would include retail uses, museums, restaurants, and cafes. And then finally, kind of a third category that's created as a part of this would be seasonal sales lots. So that would be like the pumpkin patch that happens in most communities in the fall, or many communities, Christmas tree lots as you approach the Christmas holidays, those types of things. There's a variety of kind of limitations on these, but events are proposed to be limited to either 7 consecutive days, so 1 week a year, or 6 two-day weekends within a 12-month period. And this is on an individual property. So say there is an empty lot, someone proposed to have an event on it, that would either be once a year for a week or up to 6 weekend events on that individual location. For pop-up uses, so this is an indoor temporary use of an existing building, as staff is seeing this, that would be proposed to be permitted for up to 90 consecutive days, so a 3-month time period. So that would be, say, if a local business wanted to, or a local shop owner or commercial property owner wanted to allow the historical society to operate a museum for 90 days in their vacant tenant space while they were trying to find other tenants, that would allow that to occur for a 3-month time period, with then that event having to conclude, but another event could then move into that location. So that's the 90-day time period, but no limitation on the ultimate number of individual pop-up uses proposed for one space. And then finally, the seasonal sales lots are proposed to be restricted to a maximum of 30 days, but within 4 times within a 12-month period. So in theory, that could accommodate a pumpkin patch, and then a Christmas tree lot, and then some type of summertime activity or springtime activity, maybe a farmer's market type use, and then maybe something in high summer. So these are the ideas. Staff is seeking input prior to taking it to the Planning Commission. There's some analysis in there discussing how it is in compliance. Staff finds it in compliance with CEQA, the general plan, and the zoning code. And each of these uses, it should be noted, there's a lot of specific limitations regarding how hours of operation, parking, fencing, security, all that would be managed. There's no specifics, but basically the code language allows staff to require all of those to be addressed with each individual application type. In addition to trash and litter, some of the other things that would be concerning for a post-event, we could require a bond or some type of deposit to ensure that the site gets cleaned up, or if a temporary structure is installed, that temporary structure gets removed prior to returning that deposit or that bond. So there's a lot of kind of caveats or allowances placed into the regulations to try to get in front of some of the potential impacts associated with these. Staff has identified that these types of things are intended to be limited where it's needed, and then again, there's mechanisms to ensure properties are returned to their original state. As mentioned, there's a significant amount of analysis in the staff report as it relates to the policy requirements, and there are 2 issues that staff wanted to point out. Currently, there's no differentiation in a process based on the number of attendees of an event. And so staff is requesting input on this because you can imagine, a Christmas tree lot may be one thing, but if someone wanted to propose a concert venue or something to be used on an empty lot or an empty building, that obviously would draw significant more patrons, concentrate the potential impacts of that use. And so staff is seeking input from the Planning Commission on kind of the intensity that the Planning Commission may see as warranting a change in the process, which is currently proposed to be administrative and staff level. And then similarly, staff is looking for input from the Planning Commission to take to the City Council regarding formula businesses. So would it be appropriate for a formula business to propose a temporary pop-up use in an existing retail space downtown through this use permit process? If so, should the fact that it's a formula business affect the decision process? So maybe it's not staff level anymore. Those are just some considerations that staff is looking for specific input on. And it's worth noting with the formula business or the temporary use, it is an opportunity for both the temporary use to make an attempt to try something interesting or different in town, and also an opportunity for the community to experience what it would be like to have that temporary use before making any decisions on a permanent use permit applications or something like that. So there is kind of some interesting test drive elements to having a temporary use permit process, and I will say it is very common. Almost every community has a temporary use permit process because there are often individual temporary uses, such as the temporary tree lots or the garage sales, that happen in communities, and unfortunately our code is very lacking in any type of discussion of those, and so this attempts to both broaden out what is currently seen as allowed and accepted, and also expand that to create more of a procedural process to hopefully get some activity occurring in our commercial spaces. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. The draft language is in the staff report along with the resolution proposing the recommendation, and staff does intend to take this to the City Council in October, as mentioned, at the next available agenda, which will be 23rd, in order to try to accommodate getting some of these uses downtown should the council see fit. So it's recommended by the department that the city or the Planning Commission find the proposed ordinance exempt from SEQA, review, comment, and recommend any proposed changes to the City Council, and I'm available for questions.
I have a number of questions, so I think I'll depart from my custom and lead. As I'm reading it, the question of compatibility with any proposed temporary use with the zoning district is an administrative determination. So temporary uses, at least at the level at which it's discussed in Exhibit A or the proposed 17.136.050, could occur in any zoning district, including agricultural and residential. Am I right?
That's correct.
My initial reaction is to think that there should be something here that, I mean, it doesn't have to be specific district by district, and I don't know what a pop-up residential use would look like. I'm not sure I want to think about that very hard. But I think there should be something that says one can obtain a temporary use permit for uses that are permitted or allowed by conditional use permit in that zoning district. Something like that. And I believe the language in each of our zoning districts provides as appropriate by category for other similar uses. So just something that makes it clear that we're not even contemplating pop-up restaurants in residential or pop-up factories in the agricultural zoning district. I mean, I know that sounds kind of silly, but still, that would be my preference as a matter of drafting. The only experience I have with pop-up uses has been with pop-up restaurants in San Francisco, and the ones I've been to, the use has been very brief, and in a space, a vacant restaurant space, where there's some succession of different chefs, different weeks, different weekends, doing their own pop-up thing. So, as intended, would a single application for pop-up restaurant in a space enable the property owner to have a succession of different restaurateurs? Are we dealing at the level of generality of use, or do you need a separate permit for each weekend because you've got a different crew coming to cook?
So from, as it's written now, if a property owner came and proposed a 90-day temporary restaurant pop-up use, staff would ask for those details to be included in the application if they were intending to cycle through a different chef every weekend or once a week. But absolutely that could be approved based on the individual property owner's request. Similarly, if one restaurateur or chef wanted to take the entire 90-day time period, that also would function under this proposal.
Then a related question / concern, I didn't spend a whole lot of time on this when it happened, but there was some news coverage, I want to say in the last 90 days, of a policy determination in Alameda County that was later reversed, where they temporarily prohibited pop-up restaurants because although the spaces that were being used had commercial kitchens that had been approved by the health department and met the requirements of the health department, they said that there was an element of that approval process that was personal to the applicant. Something, and again, I'm reading a newspaper story, and a lot gets lost sometimes, forgive me, Jesse, in press coverage. But my sense of it was that the concern was that they had no idea whether the people who were coming in on a pop-up basis to cook food in the restaurant knew how to comply with the health code. So my question is, have you considered consulting with the Napa County Health Department, which I believe administers the applicable regulations inside the city of St. Helena?
So any restaurant, whether it was pop-up or permanent, is required to comply with the health department mandates. Staff has not consulted with the health department regarding input on the pop-up ordinance or temporary use permit ordinance. However, any approval for a restaurant or other use that was subject to their jurisdiction would include a condition that stated such.
Yeah, I mean, my concern is simply we wouldn't want to be in a position where, as a temporary use permit, we say this is fine, and then discover that some disciple of Alameda County has taken over the Napa County Health Department, and they say, no, it's not. That was my concern.
If an individual temporary use was not able to comply with a different regulatory body's regulations, that's unfortunate, but the temporary use would not be able to move forward.
Okay. Well, you could think of that as a suggestion for the council that maybe just a little reach out and coordination would be prudent.
Staff will refer the proposal to the health department for comment. That's a good suggestion.
Those are my questions. Commissioner Knudsen.
I have one. Only because of my experience in pop-up land through my spouse. She was involved in a pop-up, put in quotes, for the tape. that was at the Native Sons Hall, and that was included in a permit that had already been issued to them, so they were allowed to do commercial activities as part of their overriding. Then there was a second that she was to be involved with that was at the petroleum station at the corner of Spring and Main Street, and that was not allowed because there had been no commercial activity in that building aside from pumping gas, apparently. So it seems like many of these sort of pop-ups that are in sort of existing buildings that may have permits already associated to them, it's really about the empty spaces in town that do not. Is that fair?
That's correct. So the Native Sons Hall, and I would say maybe a couple of the other hall buildings or even church facilities, they have a broad approval generally that allows a variety of different things. So the Native Sons Hall, for example, can have a fundraiser dinner, they can have a wedding, they could have a community meeting, and all of that falls under their kind of event space use permit or non-conforming past approvals. Churches, similarly, under a church use permit, have a broad umbrella of allowed elements of uses. But to your point, because I was the one who made the call that a pop-up use was not allowed in the petroleum station because it had not ever done anything similar before. So this is a mechanism to allow those spaces to be occupied in an interim basis. That's correct.
Great. And currently in our town, I believe it's written into the code, in residential areas, you can have a garage sale without approaching the city for a permit. And this would not presumably override or interfere with that. I'd hate to add a level of bureaucracy for that usage.
That's correct. What it does is this proposes to formalize that a little bit. The current temporary uses list 4 things, garage sales being one of them, with no discussion of any other element, just that it's a temporary use and it is able to occur. This ordinance attempts to broaden out the definition of those things, so it would allow churches to have rummage sales. All those would be permitted activities under that broader kind of church use permit approval. Individual properties could have garage sales, but there are some rules, so there's not a permanent garage sale occurring from any single-family property. So it's again very common for cities to both allow these, but also put some sideboards on them to ensure they don't become problematic. St. Helena is somewhat of a unique community in that it is kind of self-policing, and there's not anybody having permanent yard sales generally, but that does occur in some communities.
And if there were, this would allow there to be some sort of conditions around that and a mechanism for complaining, so to speak, for neighbors or others who feel like there's commercial activity going on in a residential zone. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Commissioner Pott?
Yeah. I just sort of want to start at the top here. This appears to be all ministerial. It would pass only through staff. I think I want to understand why that was done rather than passing it through the commission, what the financial implications are, and the time implications for one way or the other. First question.
So the intent was to facilitate I step back. Staff is not aware of any community that requires broader or other than administrative approval for temporary uses. So just kind of industry standard place to start. Separately, if the intent is to allow someone who has an empty business, a relatively or empty business location, or someone who has an interest in trying something, or a museum or a nonprofit to occupy an existing space on a relatively short-term basis and trying to keep the administrative burden light, the intent was to allow that to occur through a reduced administrative process, and then that reduced administrative process also allows the fee to be somewhat less than it would be to bring an item to the Planning Commission. The fee, there is a fee proposed currently of $500. Staff is going to look prior to taking this to the City Council to see if that could be reduced to increase the efficiency of it. But the whole point is to facilitate the reuse or occupancy of interest or of existing buildings, or to allow some kind of interesting cultural activity or event to occur with a relatively benign administrative process.
Great. Like Chair Hardy, I have some questions with who exactly is the holder of this permit and who exactly it applies to. It seems to me with this you've got sort of a mixed bag, as it were, particularly if a landowner comes in and applies for a use permit on which the actual users, actual salespeople or chefs or whatever, rotate in and out. And I would like to see, potentially in this ordinance, some mechanism that directly speaks to that, and some requirement, association, whatever, that be part of the release. So if you're putting a temporary pop-up restaurant in, and at the extreme you have a whole new set of chefs in there every night for 90 days, I think as part of your application process you would want to know that. I think the citizens would want to know that. Particularly if you have a bonding requirement that the owner of the parcel or restaurant may actually devolve to the restaurateurs that are coming through. So I think it's important that we have that as this proceeds. So this is kind of an odd duck. Okay, on the ordinance itself, I have some particular pieces. For example, the garage sale exemption only seems to hold true if, well, let me read it. The sale of personal goods which are owned by the household residing on the residentially zoned property for up to 3 consecutive days. So that restricts it to, I have to sell my stuff on my property. I can't wheel my old electric lawnmower over to my neighbors who's having a yard sale and have them sell it. I would like some provision for group yard sales to be accommodated as well. I don't know how you do that, but that would be nice, because there are a lot of group yard sales, and I'd certainly like that not to get people into trouble if they're selling their neighbors old junk as well.
As long as the neighbor knows about it.
Yeah.
It's a lot more interesting if they don't.
On construction yards, I notice those are exempt, and those would be, I imagine, cleared under the CEQA for the project, right? Yes. But I would like to make it be made crystal clear that is only be used for management materials and storage for that particular construction project on that site. So we don't end up with a construction project that has multiple locations and one of them gets used to store everything. Or I'm doing 10 projects and I only got one construction storage site. I want to make sure that if you have that kind of use, it gets cleared separately. Under applicability, it mentions several things, but doesn't seem to mention signage. I would like to have it clear that the signage rules will be applied to them as well. Yeah. On C6 A. The event activities just do not block building exit. In other words, in that you require 5 feet of sidewalk to remain clear. Lots of places don't have 5 feet of sidewalk to start with. The ADA rule is, I think, 42 inches.
I think that's right. Or
Yeah.
maybe
So
48.
I'd like it to stick with what we have in other pieces, like our downtown sidewalks must have ADA clearance. This should apply here as well. So it shouldn't be 5 feet. It should be significantly narrower. I don't know about anybody else, but I imagine that's an item for discussion, the time activities. You seem to be given, or staff appears to be given, pretty much carte blanche on exceeding the standards for that particular zone. If I want to put up a tent that's 50 feet tall, you'd be allowed to clear that just by yourself. I would like the zone the rules for that zone to apply to this project as well, whatever it is. Let's not be too harsh about it. I'd like to give you a little flexibility, but the way it's written now, it's pretty much the zoning rules are a guideline to you, and you can choose or to apply them or not as you care to. The problem with rules, of course, is the person changes. Their belief also changes. So although I don't think you'd put up a 50-foot tent on a lot, the next person might permit a 50-foot tent on the lot. So I would like the zoning rules to apply to that use as well, with some minor exceptions. I mean, maybe you get 10% or whatever, but something that limits it rather than unlimited. The way it's written now is pretty much unlimited. The zoning regs are a guideline. I love the bonding. And I do have some problems with it, with the time span, but I kind of presume that's for a discussion of the commission. On your two questions, yes, I think the number of patrons should be. And perhaps there should be a limit at which it does cycle into a regular permit in front of the commission. I would not like to see Bottle Rock come in on a temporary permit that's just simply approved by staff. But on the other hand, if something like Bottle Rock does want to come in, I would like some way to be forwarded to the commission. So I don't know how that works out, but that the size of the event I think is important. On the formula business, I myself would be in favor of allowing a formula business to give it a try here. I may have just crossed the Mason-Dixon line on that one, but let's think about it. I think those are my questions for staff at the present time. The rest of it has to do with the numbers and the time. I'm concerned about all of those.
I think if you cross the Mason-Dixon line here, we get pop-up fried chicken. Just saying. Pretty sure.
I'm headed toward the Waffle House as we speak. No.
As long as there's sweet tea, I'll be quite happy.
Commissioner Manette, did you have questions for the director?
Thank you. I have some questions. The first one has to do with the exemptions. And I looked at the handy exemptions that I happen to have in this 2016 exemption book. And I found that 15300.2 seemed to apply. And I was curious what you thought. Under B, exceptions, rather. Cumulative exceptions to the exemption. That's what, I'm on page 290. Well, you don't have the same thing. Okay, cumulative impact. There's no mention of anything about cumulative impact here. All exemptions for these classes are inapplicable when the cumulative impact of successive projects of the same type in the same place over time is significant. C, significant effect. A categorical exemption shall not be used for an activity where there is a reasonable possibility that the activity will have a significant effect on the environment due to unusual circumstances, which could be, many things. But particularly, I'm thinking if these pop-ups start popping up all over, the cumulative effects aren't mentioned anywhere, and I don't know how, if you agree that that's an exception to the exemption, and if you do, how that would impact what's happening here, because I certainly feel that the CEQA is not exempt from CEQA. I think those exceptions, to my mind, but I'm not a professional, so I'm willing to hear what you.
So typically, temporary uses are not seen as having impacts, and not cumulative impacts, especially because they're temporary in their nature. So it's not an incremental additive effect of multiple uses piling on another, causing a cumulative impact, because by their nature they are transitive. They come and go.
Right, but they can go. You can have 90 days there, and then you can have new
Aren't
chefs.
some temporary uses subject to analysis?
Yes, and so
wait. Let me respond to what you just said first. That's some of these pop-ups can be one pop-up after another. I didn't see anything about only one. Okay, so number one, number two, the cumulative effects of several pop-ups. So there are two ways that there could be cumulative effects from these. So I don't.
So from the staff perspective, again, temporary uses are not seen as having impacts that are permanent on the environment.
Permanent? The impacts have to be permanent in order to be considered?
Generally, yes. Just trying to think of what the environmental impacts of occupying an existing building with a temporary use would be. Staff is challenged to come up with something off the top of my head. But just the point I'm trying to make is staff did not feel that the ordinance to allow temporary uses was creating environmental impacts, and staff did find it able to fit within several categorical exemptions as referenced in the report. Planning Commission does not have to agree with staff and could find other determinations. However, based on my professional opinion, the ordinance to create and allow these temporary uses is exempt under CEQA, or could be found to be exempt under CEQA for through several exemptions. That being said, an individual temporary use could absolutely have impacts on the environment, and that's going to be the job of staff to look at all the elements proposed with that use and make a decision as to whether it can be fit under a temporary use or not.
Right, but I'm wondering, I hear you, and I respect what you said. I'm also still concerned because there could be so many happening, which is what actually I think the City Council wants to see, as many as possible happening. And so I still have concerns about that. And I suppose apropos of that concern, on letter C on page 70 of 103, numbers 3, 4, and 6, and then over on page 71, letter D, 1, 3, 4, and letter E, my concern about all of those is that there's no mention of noise pollution, light pollution, or traffic congestion. And if there's a possibility of that, it seems to me that somewhere it needs to be stated that that there's complaint-driven noise, light, traffic pollution ways to stop pop-ups that are being complained about, and that. Okay, so that's really important to me. Especially, with one or two, it might not be an issue. With 5 or 6 within 3 blocks of each other. And there's one thing here that mentions concerts. That's number 1 under letter D. Events, arts and crafts exhibits, carnivals and concerts. Is that amplified music? If there are 4 concerts around town, So you can see my point. So I would really like it to be delineated somewhere that there is a complaint-driven way to address the different kinds of concerns that were delineated in the staff report, which did not include noise and lights and traffic congestion. So I would really like to see that the noise and light be included. And the cumulative citywide effects, again, subject to reconsideration, if that this whole would be subject to reconsideration if there were lots of complaints. And then I had a question on number 4 on page 72, 103, number 4 under letter H. Can that be by the same person? Let's see, 30 days. Could the same person come back and re-up? It talks about, you could get a new similar temporary use permit for the same property. So if a person could do it, can the same person reapply and get essentially an extension but it would be under a separate, or does it have to be another person?
There's no mandate that it be a different person.
Okay, so could just.
But in no case can any use go longer than 12 months. And most uses are limited under the individual types of uses. I think the one situation would be currently there is no limit on the kind of reauthorization of a pop-up use in one location. So if you opened a restaurant for 90 days, then in theory David could open a restaurant for 90 days. If there's a concern over reauthorization of the same use to the same individual, that could be precluded.
But in that case, it could go past 12 months, or are you saying?
No, in no case can
what
any
happens after 12 months?
Then it can't be used for that temporary use anymore.
Ever again?
No, there's, I think, some provisions regarding kind of a break.
So this whole thing is essentially a 12-month trial. I mean, it can't go more than 12 months.
No, I definitely would not say that. I'm just saying temporary uses, by their very legal definition, cannot be more than 12 months. And I believe in here, it's required to have a 30-day break in between uses.
Well, okay, but it could be
lot.
the same person, or they could change the business name or something. I mean, presumably, that could be the same person, so it could be. And then I just had a question that occurred to me tonight. Do you think that this is going to, insofar it might be you might consider it a problem, do you think that this might encourage or enable landlords that are keeping these stores empty because they don't want to lower their rents? It would encourage them to, because they would get some money while they were opening for these other things, but they could still keep them empty for full-time businesses. I mean, I don't know if that's...
So in doing research for this, there are some locations which have become permanent pop-up locations. So there is never a permanent tenant located in one location. It is a constant rotation. And getting back to the Cosmont study, part of what it talked about was creating an interest in different activities occurring in downtown. So one perspective on that, whether it is a permanent pop-up location and the landlord tends to operate it that way, or whether it gets leased to a permanent individual who then maybe tries to expand their use through a limited element of adding a different pop-up use to an existing business, it would provide a mechanism to create some interesting activities downtown.
Okay, and that's where I think we get into the fish and fowl thing.
Would the landlords, they're not required to allow the pop-ups, so
that's
they
correct.
don't have to. Okay, so all right.
Director Hausch, I mean, for example, sort of permanent pop-ups, you could look at the farmers market, which exists currently today. I don't know, what is the permit that it operates under? And to
Council
whom?
approval.
So it's direct council approval. But it is ongoing every weekend. Or every Friday. It's there from May through October, or whenever they finish.
That's correct. And similar sales lot or seasonal lots are like that, whereas there's a pumpkin patch in the same location for the same set period of time every year on certain farms. Christmas tree lots tend to pop up on the same empty lots over and over again.
Not sure we'll have Christmas tree lots here, although we might need one. But the idea is something like Goodman's or some of the other empty spaces in town. I don't know what the landlords might consider would be useful, but heck, if people are trying different concepts and it sort of leads to either permanent temporary or temporary becomes permanent.
And then we get back to the difficulty of who holds the permit. who's the permittee? Is it the land use, or is it the person that moves in pop-up after pop-up after pop-up?
You mean, is it the owner?
So who ends up being responsible?
Are you asking whether it's the owner or the property?
I know you're.
No, I'm trying to clarify what you're saying.
That's one of the difficulties.
Okay, I didn't know.
Particularly since they're rotating in and out on a regular basis. If we end up with that kind of thing,
Director Hausch?
so it's a little of both.
Who has it?
So any property owner is required to sign in every application that comes through. So they're required to be aware and giving permission to any individual requesting approval. However, the property owner could file the request to operate the temporary restaurant from their location and then sublease that to an individual chef or maybe a few different individual chefs. Conversely, an individual chef getting the permission of the property owner may file to have the temporary use operate for those period of times. Whoever the applicant is required to meet all the mandates for removing elements of the temporary use after it goes away.
And insurance is the property owner's responsibility. The city's not underwriting any insurance for this.
Oh, no way.
Okay.
Another question or another comment, Director Hausch, about this, it might be that you could scale fees associated with size and length of time, right? So if you're there for a full month and you're using 2,000 square foot, that's probably a more expensive permit, I would suggest, than something that was there just for a couple of days and or 1,000 square foot, or even 2,000 square foot for a couple of days would be less than the full month, I would suggest.
And I'm wondering what criteria the staff will use in approving these. For instance, if a tattoo parlor wanted to, something that might be controversial. I mean, I don't mind tattoo parlors, but something that might be controversial to the public. I mean, what kind of criteria are you going to use?
Are you suggesting vice?
What?
Alcohol, tobacco, firearms.
I mean, or tobacco, or vaping place. So how will you decide that? Are you going to?
So I think this gets to the concern that's been expressed by Chair Hardy and Commissioner Pont, in that you need to have some zoning basis by which you are analyzing these individual uses to make a decision. So therefore, would it be appropriate to allow a concert venue at the Mormon church next to Sylvaner? Maybe not, given that it's very far outside of the central core, primarily surrounded by residential uses.
Well, it's zoned public, quasi-public. So my thought is that the question becomes, is that a use allowed in public, quasi-public? That's the way I would prefer this be structured.
Sure.
And I don't know, since concerts are an interesting example, if, off the top of my head, I don't know that we have any zoning district that calls out concerts, and then that's yet another item that probably needs some attention. But if we think about it, we can think about where concerts do occur, and then we would find that they do occur in public, quasi-public, so I'm not sure. And they occur in the commercial zoning district at restaurants. So maybe that is an adequate guide. I've been mulling over this concept of permanent pop-up, and it seems to me that if there's a property owner who, and I'm not expecting this here in St. Helena, I can see where this might very well make sense in larger urban areas where you've got a bigger market, there's more people to potentially to come patronize the pop-up businesses. But if there were someone who said, what I really want to do is turn this space into an ongoing pop-up location, then I think that should be just a use permit going to the Planning Commission. I really think that this needs to be structured so that there's some substantive meaning to the notion of temporary. And I can understand why the council direction may have been to, allow some succession of pop-up permits, which might be as long as 90 days in any particular location. But I think there needs to be some point at which the requirement of a permit, an ordinary use permit, is required. I just don't. I can't make sense out of allowing someone to create a permanent pop-up space without going through the ordinary use permit process. That doesn't seem to me the goal.
The key word
or
there
to make
is
good
permanent.
sense. In thinking about some of Commissioner Manette's concerns, if what we're talking about here are permits that are in fact limited to 90 days per permit, I think there is a real limit to the and actually I'm thinking also of some of Commissioner Pont's concerns. There's a limit to how far things can get out of control. The council always has the ability to step back and say, we may have made a mistake in this provision or that provision, and there's nothing out there that has a life longer than 90 days. So unlike other things that one does in zoning where you're issuing a use permit that in effect is permanent, because even if you change the zoning ordinance, so long as it remains in operation, it's a legal non-conforming use. With temporary permits, there is an end.
But what about the idea that there may be several 90-day ones, several over town, and they're staggered, and it could be that if this really is successful, which they want it to be, it could be that there's an ongoing
and if the council thinks that's a problem, then on any day, if they terminate the ordinance and the planning director can no longer authorize new temporary permits, then there's only 90 days more to run.
So do you think that it would be important to get language in the ordinance that gave some kind of a protocol for the council to know if there are complaints, to know, the same way we have for short-term rentals, so that there is a complaint process that the public can know, and you could even put it in our newsletter, that this is happening, and talk about the pop-ups, and that if people do have complaints about noise or whatever it could be, they would be able to register those. I just think the public really needs to have a way of saying, "Ouch, this is not working for me," and have it be known to the city council. But
But they do.
Well,
I don't think we have to teach people how to complain.
No.
I honestly don't.
We have to have a protocol, because those complaints, they get lost, and at the end of the year.
Are you thinking about something as formal as
I don't think we have to
in the
teach
like for sure.
rental
Right.
ordinance?
I really don't. Personally, I don't think that's necessary.
Well, if it's a complaint-driven oversight, then I think there needs to be a way of ensuring that complaints are registered the same way for short-term rental. For years, people were getting up in this room and very, very upset because they had called several times, and the police report they weren't gathered it wasn't well documented. And so then they started this procedure of, when it's a short-term rental complaint, there's a special way that the police department registers the complaint, because renewal of the permits were based on these complaints. It was very important that they be objectively, measurable. So I'm not hearing a lot of agreement.
Have we
that
denied short-term rental permit renewals based on complaints?
Yes.
Okay. But is that in the short-term rental ordinance, that there is a complaint thing?
It didn't work at first, and we had to revisit and kind of hone it in.
I think probably that, a question for Chair Hardy first. You're interested in pursuing uses that are allowed in that zone. Does that mean all uses that are allowed in that zone, including ones that need a conditional use permit if it's a permanent use? Like tobacconists, tattoo parlors.
Like restaurants.
You know?
I mean, we're already talking about using temporary permits to allow on a temporary basis uses that would require a conditional use permit if they were applying to be permanent.
Okay.
Now, that's baked in here. So
Okay.
yes, that's.
Okay.
I can't think of it any other way. I think if there's going to be some language that makes it more clear that the director's discretion is limited to approving uses that are consistent with the zoning ordinance for the district in which the property is located.
Okay.
That's
So we could
yeah.
have a pop-up tattoo parlor.
yes,
Okay.
and that's the way it's written. And
Yeah.
I'm not proposing to change that. And I really do believe that if it turns out that things happen as a consequence of a temporary permit that are truly disruptive in some way that registers at the public policy level,
we will hear about it.
it will get fixed.
We will hear about it.
And because it's a temporary permit, it's easy to fix.
Yeah.
So-
I want to say this, Bobby, that the rental ordinance, the complaints and how they apply only goes when you go to reapply for a permit. Right? So I'm assuming if these are truly temporary permits, and in some cases they're allowed to run a year, I would imagine that would be for they run for a year, but there are only certain periods within that year they have it available. We do indeed need to have a stop there, so somebody just can't keep reapplying. But I think the assumption here, this place will be here, it'll be gone, and it won't be back and back and back and back.
I'm not sure that's. I think that the report was hoping. The Cosmont report. Correct me if I'm wrong. They were hoping that this would, have people stay for, more than the temporary time to have those storefronts filled.
And if we get that, let's say we get storefront A has use B in it, and use B is there for 90 days and goes away, then use C comes in the storefront and is there for 90 days. We should have, I believe, that's where Chair Hardy was going to, some sort of trigger that says you can't keep doing this. You can do it for a year, and then you have to come in for a regular use permit if that's your business model. If your business model is to rent out your location for 90 days over and over and over and over again, you got to come in for a use permit.
Is that what you were talking in terms of the owner of the business? Because each person who gets the
for the location, and I don't see these permits as being any different from any other use permit. They are a permit for the location. If there's an ownership, it's the property owner who owns it. The applicant can be anyone, just as it is with a conditional use permit that comes to us.
So the owner is the one who's getting the permit, not the applicant.
Well,
that was your question.
The applicant, the owner owns the permit.
I think I can assist with some of these because these issues are addressed in the code.
Okay.
So the very last section, I3 and 4, extensions of temporary use permits are prohibited. The term of a temporary use permit may not be extended. Applicants for activities that would exceed the allowed terms identified in subsection D shall file for a use permit rather than a temporary use permit. And then number 4, required lapse of time for temporary use permits, except for seasonal sales lots, which the idea then is you could go straight from a pumpkin patch to a Christmas tree lot. A minimum of 30 days shall pass between the expiration of a temporary use permit and the issuance of a new and similar temporary use permit for the same property or the actual removal of the materials and structures associated with the former activity, whichever occurs last.
And
So
that's when I asked, can that be the same person who applies after the 30 days?
it absolutely could be. But the idea is you could go from a maximum of 90 days in one location with one individual use type, and you must take a break of a minimum of 30 days before you came back around with your similar concept. But in no case could that use, temporary use, operate from that location for more than 12 months, one 12-month period.
But I could go from restaurant temporary use to a tattoo parlor to a clothing store and so on and so forth.
That's correct,
Without a
as
break.
currently written. And if there's concerns about that, staff can forward those to the council. But the idea, again, if I have an empty business location and I'm not finding permanent tenants, I can keep test driving folks, or folks can keep test driving the site until someone who likes it for a permanent business finds it, or the city finds them.
The other thing it allows, I think, is...
Excuse me, just 1 second, because I did want to respond to that. I do think there should be some cutoff if we're talking about a continuous succession, even of different use types. I understand that there is a very strong intent here to fill empty storefronts, and I think that's important, and I support it. But I think we need to have some mechanism in the ordinance that does not allow the temporary to become permanent without a conventional use permit.
And I think you also need it the other way. You're talking about a site which has a series, right? I think also potentially of concern, but less so, nonetheless it should be included, is the use that migrates from site to site and use the temporary permit over and over and over. We need to limit that as well. Your tattoo parlor is at site X, move to site Y, move to site Z.
I'm going to come out in favor of the gypsy use myself.
It's going to be more rare, but I think it's going to happen.
I'm not troubled by that. I'm not troubled by the gypsy business.
Director Hausch, in terms of prohibited uses in town, for example, we only allow mobile marijuana purchases. You can't open a marijuana store in town. Could you open a marijuana temporary store?
The concept is that prohibited uses remain prohibited, whether they're temporary or permanent.
All right, thanks.
Nice try.
Well, as long as you change that thing about guidance. I mean, as it is now, you could. The way it's written, you could.
Someone could.
Yeah. So I think you want to change that guidance to something a bit harder.
Okay, so
I have just one last comment, which is that you'll forgive me for being very direct about this, but since the director's job depends on the goodwill of 3 council members at any given meeting, I'm not too worried about abuse of discretion on permits that are temporary. I'd be more concerned if the same discretion applied to uses that were permanent, because they would be permanent. But I'm not so worried about the temporary.
I am. There's no reason to write a rule unless you write a rule that you really want to apply. And I think limiting discretion is something you always want to apply.
And I also think that even though it's somewhat of a oxymoron, maybe, I'm not sure that that there could be cumulative effects from temporary permits. I think there could be, and I have a lot of concern about the lights and the noise and the traffic and et cetera. If it is as successful as the Cosmont people would like to see it, and so I'm still interested in some kind of oversight or complaint mechanism so that the council can be advised about how how things are going before a year is up.
Would you agree to that being done not as part of the ordinance, but say as part of the staff report? You know, we're going to watch these, we're going to collect data on them, and we're going to report back on a yearly basis for the first 3 to 5 years as this thing gets moving.
No, the reason I say not is that I'm thinking of the public. I'm thinking of a sense of empowerment, because when your environment is impacted significantly by noise and light and traffic, you don't want to, I think that you want to have a voice, and a voice that I think it needs to be in the ordinance. It needed to go in the ordinance for the short-term rental issue, and because especially if people are making money from what's going on, it's particularly hard for a voice from the public to be heard. And that was certainly the case with the short-term rentals. There was so much money coming to the city and to the people renting that the neighbors' voices were, I think, a little drowned out by the ka-ching of the going on. So I think, and the success and the excitement. So I don't, I'm not against it at all. I just think that's an important thing to build in so that there's a sense of safety and support for the peace and tranquility that people are used to in these areas, which might be impacted by this stuff. That's all.
Well, maybe this is as much a matter of political theory as anything else, but I think the opportunity to be empowered is present at every meeting, and it starts with a public forum section. All people ever need to do is come to the microphone. And what concerns me is that we avoid discouraging people from really empowering themselves by showing up.
Well, I think it's a cultural thing, and I think it's very, number one, intimidating to come to a meeting and speak here. Number two, it's intimidating and terrifying to call the police. I mean, I have trouble calling the police when neighbors are being really, and not anymore, but I did for a long time. And if there is a way to do it that can overcome initial reluctance of people to expose themselves as complaining in front of a camera, and it's also very classist. I mean, there are people who don't even know these meetings happen. Maybe they should, and maybe you're saying, well, if you don't know it, then you don't get to be a citizen, but I don't feel that way. I feel that if you're being impacted by some significant impacts of some of these pop-ups, your inclination would be to call the police, even though that's hard. And if the police had a way of taking your complaint and putting it somewhere where it might be gathered so that people in charge to evaluate this program at the end of the year could look at it and see, we had this many complaints in October, and this, I just think that...
Commissioner Monette, this pop-up ordinance is primarily aimed to fill empty storefronts downtown, which would still be limited to hours that would be reasonable, I presume.
Well,
yes, there are people can complain about commercial activity, absolutely, but I suspect are we overthinking this? I mean, what are the activities in residential neighborhoods? Garage sales. That's about it, right?
Well, how do you know? And things. I hear what you're
because
saying.
Because as Chair Hardy has suggested, that we incorporate the existing zoning restrictions into the ability for people to do pop-ups they can't do them unless they fit in the existing zoning regulations.
Even yard sales. Yard sales can wake you up when they start at 6 in the morning.
They can't start at 6.
They do. They start setting up at 6 in the morning. And
Okay.
They can't. All I'm saying is that, and traffic congestion, all I'm saying is that it's so easy to build it into the ordinance. It's being respectful of people who may be impacted by the significant impacts of this ordinance. And I think we owe it to the public, to every part of the public, even those that don't know about coming to meetings and don't know about that kind of complaint. I think we owe it to have that.
I'm going to suggest something here, Bobby, and let me say that, your kind of concern could apply to just about any use in here. So I would suggest that rather than build it in each and every section as we move on, if this is a real concern of yours, and we're going to be rewriting this whole thing in a few months, that, we consider putting a section in. Otherwise, you're going to have the same thing sprinkled in every section of this ordinance over and over and over and over again. And that doesn't make any sense.
Not necessarily. I think this is an appropriate place to have that.
So staff definitely hears the concern of an individual commissioner, and will, as directed in the bylaws, when there's lack of consensus, staff brings forward the individual concerns to the council for their consideration. And I was hoping to summarize the direction so far, and then the commission can chime in and let staff know if I've missed anything. So the commission has concerns and wants to ensure that the ordinance addresses both applicants' and owners' responsibility for the temporary uses and the potential impacts thereof. Ensure referral to the health department for any restaurant use or other use that is governed by the health department. That the allowed uses under the temporary process have some basis in the allowances of the zoning district, and include development standards to guide the decisions as to whether or not that use should be approved. Definitely make sure that the definition of temporary uses is substantive and require a break in between. Only one commissioner voiced these two, and so I would seek additional input from the commission on this. The number of patrons should be limited, or the planning commission should make the decision, or potentially the city council. And one commissioner expressed an interest in allowing formula businesses to locate in town under the temporary use permit. And then in no case shall one location be utilized for ongoing temporary uses without obtaining a use permit from the planning commission.
And one commissioner
I'm sorry.
brought up about the exception to the exemption, the CEQA exemption.
And concerns were voiced regarding the use of the CEQA exemption for this process.
There was one,
and
Question.
That there, and this is regarding the potential effects of proliferation of temporary uses, and in addition, some concerns over the impacts of noise and light, and therefore maybe a complaint mechanism could be created as a part of the ordinance. And just to remind the commission, traffic congestion is no longer a CEQA impact as of 2019.
As to the unanswered questions, I'll add my responses. Couple things. For indoor uses, I would think the number of patrons would be regulated by the fire department in effect. So it seems to me the
question from staff was primarily related to concerts or festivals.
Outdoor.
Yeah.
And
Or tent.
all I can say off the top is I think there needs to be some standard by which that's evaluated. And if it's not a fire department standard, I'm not sure what it should be, but I think that does need to be addressed in the ordinance. I agree with Commissioner Pont. I think pop-up formula is fine. Was there another question that you wanted to? No, those are the two. Okay. Thank you.
You just got two on that one, the formula, yeah.
Fine with formula. So that's 3. And I concur with Chairman Hardy and Commissioner Pont on the remaining. items. And
Excellent.
I hope that you'll also consider the sliding scale on the cost of
Oh,
this.
thank you. Yeah, the
Yeah.
fees.
Oh, yeah.
So with that, staff will be modifying the ordinance.
If I can ask, what about the little, sometimes picky, sometimes not?
Oh, yeah.
The 5 feet.
Commissioner Pont pointed out a number of kind of technical elements of the code that staff is in full agreement with regarding implementation. The ADA compliance, broadening some of the references to include signs. There's some other discussions Commissioner Pont and staff had offline regarding some of the other kind of nuances and a little bit of inconsistencies in the code, and staff does anticipate. So there's, for example, under events, right now it's limited to 7 consecutive days or 6 two-day weekends, and that's kind of an inconsistency because you could get 14 days under the weekends and 7 days under the consecutive, so there's some direction on that. And then also to add some strength to the language regarding what you are considering and how you're considering it in making the decisions, which I think gets back to the point about basis in the zoning code. But with that, staff is anticipating drafting this ordinance and trying to get it to the planning commission, or I'm sorry, the city council for first reading on October 23rd. If the council chooses to approve it or not, it would go into effect 30 days after the second reading. So it's still not going to give a lot of time for the Christmas holiday season, but it is intended to allow some interesting activities to begin to occur as the holidays kind of...
Everybody out there, apply now.
Sounds good. And I'm just going to take this opportunity to make some comments I hope will be noted by the press. I think it's really important that we undertake from time to time in response to our own concerns to educate the public about how our process works and how they can be most effective in addressing their own concerns. It's just a fact that after normal business hours, when a loud party or whatever constitutes the kind of immediate nuisance that one is seeking some immediate relief, there is no alternative to the police department. That is the case. But in general, code enforcement is not the police department's responsibility, and zoning code enforcement issues are best brought either here, where the planning director will hear them, as well as the commission, or to City Hall, to the planning department, I'm pretty sure.
I would just add to that, we have a complaint form that's available on our website, and we are moving to allow it to be digitally filled out and submitted electronically without having to print anything. I will also add, a complaint does not necessarily mean a violation. However, once we receive a complaint, we immediately undertake to verify the facts related to that complaint. If a violation is determined, we do move forward with seeking compliance, and there's been evidence of that, I believe, since I've been working here.
Will that complaint application be bilingual?
It is not currently. We can work towards making all of our applications available in both English and Spanish. That's an excellent suggestion.
And I really like the idea of an education effort. And
ongoing.
Yes,
and
I think it's important.
The more members of the public who come here to speak to us, the better. And I feel very strongly about that. And if we're not doing a good enough job of reminding people that we want to hear from them, then we need to do that more often. Okay, now I think I go back to the agenda, not being entirely sure. There are no scheduled matters. Are there any department reports?
Chair Hardy, as part of protocol, did you open a public hearing?
There is a resolution
I did not hear
formalizing the recommendation.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Gamero. I was glossing over that important detail. I will open the public hearing and ask if there is anyone who would like to speak. That was a very clear and unequivocal no. I will close the public hearing. Is a motion appropriate then? You took direction.
But I think a motion and a vote on the resolution is appropriate based on the direction provided.
Well, I would move that we advance this modification to the council with the changes we brought up tonight and with our concerns as well. And on only my note, I think this is a great idea. We could use some pop-ups. Anyway, you got a motion.
I can second that. And I also would like to say with the microphone on, that I appreciate the brilliant summary that our director Director Hausch made of our discussion tonight. I thought I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Ms. Camaro?
Commissioner Pont,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Vice Chair Knudsen,
Yes.
Chair Hardy.
Yes. Okay. We'll reboot here. Seeing no scheduled matters, are there any department reports?
Just briefly, I would just like to note, development activity and interest remains strong in St. Helena. However, we are we're dealing with the loss of staff. As last meeting was our consulting planner, Miss Bianco's last day, and so we're kind of struggling under the weight a little bit. At the same time, we're also trying to maintain the general plan review schedule and EIR schedule, so it's just kind of a perfect storm of staff impacts. That being said, we're prioritizing, working with the city council and the city manager to prioritize our efforts and ensure that we minimize the number of balls that drop through this kind of transition period. And we are still pushing to publish the EIR and general plan update in mid-October for public review and comment. So we are pushing to maintain that schedule, but just please bear with us if your applications are a little bit longer or it's taking an extra day or two to return your phone calls or meeting requests, as we are struggling. It's only Aaron and myself in the department currently.
I have a question for Director Hausch about the staff report. May I?
Yes.
Chair Hardy? You had a temporary fellow who was doing some of the work. Has he left?
So Joseph Brokoff was an intern, and so the interns in St. Helena are during a limited period of time. Also, so that is a temporary employee under the structure of the internship. He also was interested in pursuing more professional and more lucrative, I think, pursuits, and he is pursuing a professional planning position, but he's no longer working as an intern for us. We are looking to replace him and may be interested in hiring another planning intern. However, we're trying to get kind of some of our higher level staffing solutions caught up with first.
Thank you.
When is the earliest that the general plan could actually be certified, given your October publication with 45 days?
So we're going to actually do a 60-day public review and comment period because of the volume of information that's going to be coming out. Both the EIR is a voluminous document and the general plan itself. We want people to be sure to have time to feel comfortable with the amount of information. So we're going to publish for 60 days. Assuming we did that on October 15th as just a rough date, then that would put December 15th as the end of the 60-day period. As you know, that's just before the Christmas holiday. We do anticipate holding one public comment period during that 60-day period here with the Planning Commission. So expect to have a general plan EIR comment period at one of the Planning Commission meetings. We are not proposing to cancel any meetings during the holiday schedule, so please let staff know if you have any vacation timeframes, those types of things. The first meeting of the 2019 is canceled, so likely we would be bringing forward a document with a response to comments. The very soonest would be the third Tuesday in January. That would be the very soonest that could occur, assuming the Planning Commission was amazed at the work and had no concerns or holding it back for or continuing the item. Then it would move on to the Planning Commission, the City Council in February. So that would be the very soonest anything could be adopted. Staff is anticipating maybe 1 or 2 meetings at each body, or 2 meetings at each body, just to allow full public comment and understanding of the situation, full commission comment and understanding of the situation. So late February, early March is likely to be the soonest that either document will be certified or adopted.
That's it, folks. Adjourned.